At 58 years old, Freyja Kendrick walked into a surgeon's office in serious pain. Her knee was deteriorating. She needed surgery. She had waited weeks for this appointment, weeks of icing, of resting, of telling herself relief was finally close. The surgeon looked at her chart. Then he looked at her. And then he told her something she would never forget. He would not operate. Not yet. Not until she lost weight. Most people would have left that office feeling defeated, dismissed, even told, in effect, that their pain didn't matter as much as a number on a scale. Freyja Kendrick left feeling something else entirely, determined. This is her story. And by the end of it, you may find yourself looking at your own obstacles a little differently. Life before. Knee pain is a thief. It steals your ability to move freely. To walk at a normal pace. To climb stairs without bracing for the jolt that runs up through your leg with every step. To sleep through the night without your leg aching, without shifting position over and over trying to find one that doesn't hurt. It steals smaller things too, things people don't think about until they're gone. The ability to get down on the floor to play with a grandchild and get back up without help. The ability to walk through a grocery store without calculating, in advance, whether there's somewhere to sit down if it gets to be too much. The ability to simply not think about your body for a few hours at a time. For Freyja Kendrick, 58, this was daily reality. Her knee was damaged, deteriorating, and causing her significant suffering, the kind of suffering that doesn't announce itself dramatically but instead wears a person down slowly, day after day, until exhaustion and pain become almost indistinguishable from each other. She had tried to manage it on her own for longer than she probably should have. Over-the-counter pain relievers that worked less and less over time. Ice packs that offered an hour of relief before the ache crept back in. Modifications to her daily routine of parking closer, avoiding stairs when she could, sitting down more often, small accommodations that, one by one, had quietly shrunk the size of her life. Eventually, the pain became impossible to manage around. She sought medical help, which is exactly what you're supposed to do when your body is telling you something is wrong. She had done everything right. She had waited, she had tried conservative treatments, and when those weren't enough, she had gone to a specialist, hoping for a clear path forward. There was also a quieter cost to all of this that doesn't always make it into stories about chronic pain, the social withdrawal that happens gradually, almost without noticing. Freyja had started declining invitations that once would have been easy yes. A friend's birthday dinner at a restaurant with no close parking. A walk along the waterfront with her sister, something they used to do together every few weeks. A family gathering that would require standing for long stretches in a kitchen. Each individual decline felt minor in the moment. Together, over a couple of years, they added up to a life that had gotten smaller in ways she hadn't fully registered until she was forced to sit and think about it. She was expecting a solution. Instead, she received a condition. The surgeon's ultimatum. Her surgeon was direct, in the way that many surgeons are trained to be, not unkind, necessarily, but blunt, focused on facts rather than feelings. Operating on a knee under significant excess body weight carries serious risks. Recovery is harder. Outcomes are worse, statistically, across a range of measures. The replacement surgery itself is more technically complicated, and the artificial joint itself bears more mechanical load, which can shorten its lifespan. In his clinical judgment, Freyja needed to lose weight before he could safely help her. He wasn't being cruel. He was, from his perspective, protecting her from a surgery that carried elevated risk of complications, infection, poor wound healing, blood clots, a longer and more painful recovery. He had seen those complications before, in other patients, and he didn't want to add her to that list. But understanding his reasoning didn't make hearing it any easier. This is a conversation that happens in medical offices around the world every single day, and it is one of the most complicated, emotionally charged moments a person can face. You came for help with your pain. You are being told your body is standing in the way of the treatment you need. There is a particular kind of helplessness in that, the sense that the thing causing your suffering is also, somehow, being held up as the reason you can't get relief from it. For many people, this moment leads to shame, to anger, to a kind of quiet withdrawal, the decision, conscious or not, to simply stop trying, to accept the pain is permanent because the path forward feels impossibly far away. For Freyja, in that moment, sitting in that office, it became something else. Not immediately, nobody feels instantly empowered by being told no. But somewhere underneath the disappointment, a different reaction was forming. It became a starting gun. The emotional aftermath. Let's not skip past this moment, because it deserves more attention than it usually gets in stories like this one. Being told your weight is preventing your medical care is not something you brush off on the drive home. It lands. It hurts. It stirs up complicated feelings about your body, about the medical system, about fairness, about whether you are somehow being punished for something that, at 58, after years of life and stress and hormonal changes and 100 other factors outside your control, doesn't feel entirely like a simple matter of willpower. Freyja sat with those feelings. She didn't rush to put a positive spin on it. She didn't have to pretend it was fine, because it wasn't fine, not in that moment. There is real grief in being told that your body, as it currently exists, is a barrier rather than a partner. There is anger in feeling like the healthcare system is asking you to solve a problem before it will help you solve the problem you actually came in for. She sat in her car outside that office for a while. She has said, since, that she cried, not dramatically, just quietly, the kind of crying that comes from exhaustion more than anything else. The exhaustion of dealing with pain for so long, and then being told there was one more mountain to climb before relief was even on the table. But then, somewhere in that parking lot, she made a choice. Not a grand, cinematic decision, just a quiet shift in how she was going to hold what had just happened. She could be angry at the situation, which was fair, and which she allowed herself to feel fully. Or she could take that anger and turn it into fuel for something that might actually change her life, not just her knee. She chose the fuel. It's worth pointing out that this choice wasn't obvious or easy. Anger doesn't automatically become motivation. For a lot of people, and understandably so, that kind of moment leads to disengagement, to deciding the whole system is unfair and stepping away from it entirely. Freyja's path forward wasn't the only reasonable response to what happened to her. It was simply the one she chose, and the one that ultimately gave her back more than she expected. It's also worth being honest about the broader debate her experience touches on, because pretending it doesn't exist would flatten her story into something simpler than it actually was. There is real, ongoing discussion in medicine about whether conditioning surgery on weight loss is always fair, or whether it sometimes creates a barrier that disproportionately affects patients who are already dealing with other obstacles, financial, physical, emotional. Freyja herself has said she doesn't think there's an easy answer. She understood her surgeon's reasoning from a purely clinical standpoint, and she also understood why other patients in her exact position might feel like the requirement was one burden too many. Both things can be true. Her story isn't an argument that every patient in her situation should simply be grateful for the ultimatum. It's simply an account of what she, specifically, chose to do with the one she received. Finding a starting point. At 58, with a damaged knee making vigorous exercise painful, sometimes simply impossible, Freyja had to find a starting point that worked for her specific body and her specific situation. She couldn't follow a generic weight loss plan designed for someone without joint pain. She needed something built around her actual constraints. She couldn't run. Even brisk walking on certain days sent sharp pain through her knee. She couldn't do high-impact exercise of almost any kind, no jumping, no aerobics classes, nothing that involved sudden or repeated jolts through the joint. What she could do was move in ways that were kind to her injury while still burning calories and building the strength her body needed. She started by talking to her primary care doctor and, eventually, a nutritionist, to build a plan that made sense for her body as it actually was, not as she wished it were. This meant being honest about her limitations from the very beginning, rather than setting an ambitious exercise plan she'd likely abandon within weeks out of pain or frustration. She focused on low-impact movement, swimming, gentle walking on flat, forgiving surfaces, and seated exercises that let her build upper body and core strength without putting weight through her knee. She worked with a nutritionist to overhaul her diet in a sustainable way, focusing on whole foods, adequate protein, and portion awareness rather than any kind of extreme restriction that would have been impossible to maintain for the months ahead. She tracked her progress carefully, not obsessively, but consistently. Weekly weigh-ins. A simple food journal. Notes on how her knee felt on a given day, because that mattered just as much as the number on the scale. And she showed up every day. Not perfectly. Not without pain. There were days when even the modified plan felt like too much, when her knee ached simply from being upright for a few hours. But consistently, she showed up in whatever way she could that day, even if showing up on a bad day meant 5 minutes of gentle stretching instead of a full walk. Adapting to pain. One of the most remarkable aspects of Freyja's journey is how she adapted to her constraint, rather than being defeated by it. Most people in her situation would have used the knee pain as an excuse, and a legitimate one. I can't exercise because my knee hurts. That would have been true. Nobody would have blamed her for saying it and stopping there. But Freyja asked a different question, one that ended up shaping everything that followed. What can I do? She couldn't run. But she could swim. Water supports the body's weight while still providing significant resistance, which meant she could get her heart rate up and work her muscles without the impact that made land-based cardio so painful. Pool sessions became a cornerstone of her routine, a place where, for the first time in a long while, movement didn't automatically mean pain. She couldn't do high-impact cardio. But she could walk slowly, carefully, on flat terrain, building up her distance gradually over weeks and months rather than pushing too hard too soon and setting herself back. She couldn't do traditional weight training on her legs, the kind of squats and lunges that would have aggravated her knee immediately. But she could do seated exercises, upper body work, and core training. She could use her arms and torso while protecting her injured knee, building overall strength and burning calories without undermining the very joint she was trying to heal. This is a crucial lesson buried inside her story. The obstacle becomes the teacher. Your limitations force you to be creative, to look sideways at problems instead of straight ahead, and that creativity often leads to better, more sustainable results than if you had never been constrained in the first place. A person with no physical limitations might have thrown themselves into an aggressive workout program, burned out within a month, and quit. Freyja's constraint, paradoxically, protected her from that particular failure mode. Because low-impact exercise, swimming, walking, gentle strength training, turned out to be exactly what her body needed. It was sustainable in a way that more aggressive approaches often aren't. It didn't aggravate her injury further. It kept burning calories while allowing her body space to manage inflammation and, eventually, heal. She also made an important psychological shift along the way. Instead of seeing her knee pain as a permanent barrier to fitness, a life sentence, similar to the myth so many people carry about aging bodies in general, she began to see it as a temporary condition that required temporary accommodations. This is where I am right now, she told herself, repeatedly, on the days it was hardest to believe. And I'm going to work with this. Not against it. That mindset, that acceptance of present reality combined with a refusal to be stopped by it, carried her through the hardest months of the process. It's a subtle but important distinction. Acceptance isn't the same as giving up. She accepted that her knee hurt today. She did not accept that it would always be this way. She also made a point of having regular conversations with her surgeon throughout the process, rather than disappearing for months and simply hoping for the best at the end. She got monthly updates on her progress, weigh-ins that doubled as accountability checkpoints. You've lost 15 pounds, that helps your knee, the surgeon would tell her. Keep going. That professional affirmation, coming from the very person who had initially been the source of such painful news, became incredibly motivating. It transformed him, in her mind, from a gatekeeper into something closer to a partner, someone tracking her progress alongside her, rooting for the same outcome she was working toward. By the time she approached her follow-up evaluation, her knee pain had actually diminished significantly. Not because the structural damage inside the joint had healed on its own, it hadn't, and wouldn't without surgery. But because the weight loss had reduced the mechanical load on the joint with every single step she took, which measurably reduced her day-to-day pain even before the operation happened. She had essentially earned a double victory, the weight loss required by the surgeon to make the operation safer, plus an actual, tangible reduction in the very symptom that had brought her to his office in the first place. The journey. Month after month, Freyja made progress. It wasn't linear. It rarely is. The knee pain that had brought her to the surgeon's office in the first place made everything harder than it would have been for someone without that limitation. Ordinary obstacles, a bad week at work, a family stressor, a holiday full of tempting food, were compounded by the physical reality of trying to build a fitness routine around an injury that didn't take days off. But she adapted, over and over. She found what she could do on any given day, and she did it, even when what she could do was less than what she'd hoped. Some weeks were better than others. There were weeks where the scale moved steadily downward and her energy climbed along with her confidence. And there were weeks where the number didn't budge despite her best efforts, weeks where the frustration was almost unbearable, where it would have been easy to conclude that none of it was working and go back to how things had been before. But the image of that surgeon's office, that ultimatum, delivered so plainly, kept her going through those harder stretches. She had a goal that was more concrete and urgent than most people carrying extra weight ever have. She wasn't just trying to lose weight for vague aesthetic reasons, or for health benefits that felt distant and abstract. She had a specific, dated, high-stakes reason, a knee that needed relief, a surgery that needed to happen, and a doctor who had told her exactly what needed to change before he could help her. She needed this. She needed it to walk without pain. To live without limitation. To get the medical care her body required and deserved. That specificity of purpose, the simple, unglamorous truth of "I need this to function," is one of the most powerful motivators that exists, more durable, in many cases, than motivation rooted in appearance or in someone else's expectations. There were setbacks along the way that are worth naming honestly, because they're part of what makes her story useful rather than just inspiring. There was a stretch in the middle of her journey where a family emergency pulled her attention away from her routine for several weeks, and she gained back a few of the pounds she'd lost. There was a period where her knee flared up so badly that even swimming became difficult, and she had to scale back to almost nothing for nearly a month, terrified she was losing momentum she couldn't get back. But each time, she returned to the same question that had carried her from the beginning: what can I do, right now, given where I actually am? Not what she wished she could do. Not what she'd been able to do the month before. Just the next available step, however small. That question, asked and re-asked patiently over the better part of a year, is what ultimately got her to the finish line she'd been working toward. What a typical week looked like. It's worth slowing down here and describing what an actual week looked like for Freyja during this period, because stories like this one can start to feel abstract, and abstract is easy to admire but hard to copy. Her week typically included 3 pool sessions, not competitive swimming, nothing that would have impressed anyone watching, just 20 to 30 minutes of steady movement in the water, sometimes swimming laps, sometimes simply walking back and forth in the shallow end when her knee was having a harder day and even swimming felt like too much. She learned to let the pool schedule flex around how she was actually feeling rather than forcing herself through a rigid plan that didn't account for pain. On the days between pool sessions, she walked. Short distances at first, on flat, even ground near her home, gradually extending as her stamina and her tolerance for the movement improved. She kept a simple paper log, not an app, nothing complicated, just a notebook where she wrote down what she did and how her knee felt afterward, which over time became a useful record of what helped and what didn't. Meals followed a similar philosophy of simplicity over perfection. Breakfast was almost always protein-forward eggs, or a protein shake on rushed mornings. Lunch and dinner centered around lean protein and vegetables, with grains and starches present but modest in portion. She didn't eliminate foods she loved entirely, she simply became more intentional about how often and how much. A slice of cake at a birthday party was not a crisis. A pattern of daily indulgence would have been, and she stayed aware of the difference. Once a week, she allowed herself a genuine rest day, not out of guilt, but by design, understanding that her body, particularly her joint, needed recovery time built into the plan rather than treated as an afterthought or a failure. None of this was glamorous. None of it would have made for a dramatic highlight reel. But it was repeatable, week after week, for the better part of a year, and repeatable, unglamorous consistency is what actually produced the results that got her back into that surgeon's office with a different outcome waiting for her. The surgery she earned. She returned to that surgeon's office. And this time, the answer was yes. She had lost enough weight to make the surgery viable, according to the same clinical standards that had turned her away months before. She had done what she had been asked to do not because she should have had to earn a basic level of medical care, a point she has been candid about feeling conflicted over even now, but because she had chosen to respond to an obstacle with action rather than surrender. There is a particular kind of relief that comes from hearing yes after months of working toward it, different from the relief of never having been told no in the first place. It carries the weight of everything that led up to it. Freyja has described that appointment as one of the proudest moments of her adult life, not because losing weight is inherently something to be proud of, but because of everything that specific accomplishment represented: months of showing up, of adapting, of choosing to keep going on the days it would have been easier to stop. The surgery went ahead not long after. The recovery, as her surgeon had warned her from the start, was hard. Surgical recovery always is, particularly for a joint replacement. There was pain, there was physical therapy, there were weeks of slow, careful progress learning to trust the new joint. But she had done the hardest work before she ever got there. The months of preparation had not just made the surgery possible, they had made the recovery itself more manageable, because her body was stronger, more mobile, and more resilient than it had been a year earlier. Her physical therapist, in fact, remarked early in her recovery that she was progressing faster than many patients half her age, not because the surgery itself had gone differently, but because she walked into that operating room already stronger than she'd been in years, with muscles around the joint that had been quietly rebuilt during all those months of swimming and walking and seated strength work. The preparation she'd done for the surgeon's sake turned out to also be, unintentionally, the best possible preparation for her own recovery. Life after transformation. Today, Freyja Kendrick moves differently. She walks without the constant reminder of her knees' limitations shadowing every step. She climbs stairs without bracing for impact. She gets down on the floor and back up again without a second thought, a small thing, an unremarkable thing to most people, and something she does not take for granted for a single day. She has a body that has been through something remarkable, a medical ultimatum that could easily have become a source of lasting resentment, turned instead into a catalyst for a complete change in how she relates to her own health and her own capability. Her story is not, at its core, about a surgeon being cruel. It's easy to tell it that way, and there are elements of the medical system worth questioning honestly. The fairness of conditioning care on weight loss is a real and complicated conversation, and Freyja herself doesn't pretend otherwise. But underneath that complexity, her story is really about what can happen when a person is forced, by circumstance, to confront what is actually possible for them and decides, even reluctantly at first, to find out. She still swims regularly, not because she has to anymore, but because it became something she genuinely enjoys, a habit that outlasted its original purpose. She still pays attention to her nutrition, though with far less rigidity now than during the months she was working toward a deadline. She has kept the weight off in the time since her surgery, something she attributes directly to the fact that her new habits were built to be sustainable from the very beginning, not just endured for a finish line. We are all, it turns out, more capable than the circumstances we're handed initially tell us we are. It often takes something as blunt and unwelcome as an ultimatum to reveal that capability, not because we needed the ultimatum to deserve help, but because sometimes it takes a hard deadline to show us what we were capable of the whole time. Freyja proved that at 58, starting from a place of chronic pain and real physical limitation, with no shortcuts available to her. You can prove it at whatever age you are right now, whatever obstacle currently feels immovable. The starting point doesn't have to be dramatic. It can simply be the same question that carried Freyja through her hardest months, not what can't I do, but what can I do, starting today. If there's one thing worth taking from her story beyond the surgery and the weight loss itself, it might be this: obstacles don't always arrive as villains. Sometimes they arrive as blunt, unwelcome, even unfair conditions, a surgeon's ultimatum, a diagnosis, a closed door. And while it's completely valid to feel angry or discouraged when that happens, there is often, underneath that first reaction, a choice about what to do next. Freyja didn't get to choose the ultimatum. She got to choose what she did with it. That distinction made all the difference for her, and it's available to anyone facing their own version of that same moment. Please like, share, and subscribe for more real transformation stories every week.